Now, the news out of New South Wales is not good. The gold standard when it comes to contact tracing is going to be tested because one case has now become 17. On the northern beaches of Sydney, what started with a worker who was moving from the northern beaches to the western suburbs, and apparently has been for some time, there has now been an increase in cases. Now, as you know, words like cluster get thrown around, outbreaks get thrown around, but there are some concerning signs about what might be getting worse before it gets better. We got this information in the past hour or so from New South Wales Health, and they are saying anyone on the northern beaches watching us tonight, from the Spit Bridge all the way to Palm Beach, that's a lot of people, a lot of suburbs. You're being told to work from home if you can. Do not visit family or friends. Certainly don't go to aged care facilities. Try to, do you can, to keep your household group together. The kids are not at school at the moment, so thankfully the interaction with other families is going to be kept to some minimum. I know there are people who have to go to work in other parts of the town. If that's what you've got to do, that's what you've got to do, but let's keep it down as low as possible. We need to make sure that as many people get tested as possible, and we need to make sure that contact tracing is through the roof. So, better be safe than sorry. It's going to be a tickle. It's not going to be fun. There's going to be a big queue. But to make sure that this becomes a story of only a few days and not a calamity like the overreaction in South Australia, we need to make sure that this can be dealt with, because remember, New South Wales was able to deal with 40 plus cases when it was the Crossroads Hotel. Now, this has the capacity, the potential to be no worse than it is or a whole lot worse than Crossroads. So you can do your bit by pulling back from what you're planning to do over the next couple of days, getting a test, because that's going to be really important. Doesn't mean cancel Christmas, but it means if you're planning Friendsmas or something fun, this weekend mightn't be the one to do it. You'll have to put it off and put it off for a couple of weeks, and it's all for everyone's interest there. That said, as you know, the hair trigger that the Australian economy sits upon is that our borders remain open. There are politicians who will close them and will close them at a moment's notice. Put simply, if this was happening on the 17th of January, the borders probably would have already been closed in places like Western Australia and Queensland. But because we're in the lead up to Christmas, and not even the power-hungry premiers want to cut people off when it comes to interaction at Christmas, they might still see a need to do it in the next little while. So to make sure that our country remains open, if you're on the northern beaches, follow the advice, because it is the gold standard. Let's make sure that we can get on top of the grass fire before it becomes a bush fire. If things get wildly out of control, obviously we'll give you all of the updates and all the information, and we'll tell you more that comes to hand in the next couple of hours, because if there's any further updates, and we're expecting one shortly from the New South Wales Health Department, we'll whack it up straight on the screen for everyone who cares. Perfect example of one of those premiers who has an election coming up ahead and expects the same result they got out of Queensland, the same result they got out of the Northern Territory, the same result they got out of the ACT, the same result they got out of New Zealand, which was massive, thumping victories for the establishment and the established government. Mark McGowan, who has that election coming up in March, who has a ridiculously high personal approval rating. But even though I still will refer to him as Emperor McGowan and the Emperor has no clothes for how naked he is in using the politics of COVID for his own advancement, and he probably will be incredibly successful. As I jokingly-ish say, he will win every seat in the lower house, upper house, and if they can invent a third chamber, he'll do that too. But Mark McGowan is tweeting, and tweeting rather madly today, that effectively, immediately, anyone who's arrived from New South Wales since the 11th of December, or was in New South Wales from 11 December, and subsequently arrived in Western Australia, needs to self-quarantine at a suitable premises as soon as possible. That put simply means stay with your parents. You also need to get a test in the next 24 hours. I certainly know a couple of our dear friends who are in Western Australia who would normally work with us here at Sky News. They are doing that as we speak. Here's the scary bit. We will not hesitate to change our border controls if the health advice recommends. Remember the health advice that said he couldn't go to National Cabinet this time last week. I know these changes will cause frustration and uncertainty for some people, but we ask for your patience and understanding. As for the pointless Premier, whose unemployment rate is still higher than national average, to protect vulnerable Queenslanders, anyone who's been on the northern beaches of New South Wales since the 11th of December will not be able to visit Queensland. It is now a hotspot that you will not be able to get in there, and you won't be able to go to the aged care centres, hospitals, or, if you had plans to do this, correctional facilities. But remember, all of the assumptions that are into the federal budget were based off two big things. One, a vaccine. And as we told you last night, there are public health officials in the United States and even here in Australia that are warning you won't have to get it once, you'll have to get it twice, and everyone will have to get it before we can start to breathe easy. And secondly, that the borders stay open. If the borders lock up again, then so does the economy. If you reduce demand from the economy, then we dig ourselves into another pit. So hopefully these premiers do the best thing by the country and their citizens, which is, yes, to stay on top of the grass fires and not just fear that every grass fire automatically becomes a bushfire.